My name is Emily Carter. I'm 31 years old, and to this day, I'm still treated like I'm invisible in my own family. In meetings, they hand me a cup of coffee, not a seat of power. They call me sweet, reliable, but never capable. I've sat in rooms where inheritance and leadership were discussed as if I wasn't there, as if they forgot I carry the Carter name too. Then, the will was read. One sentence turned the whole room upside down. My name, mine alone, was clearly stated as the sole heir to my grandfather's entire company. Every face froze. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. And for the first time, no one interrupted me when I spoke. They didn't see it coming. But I had been quietly preparing for this moment for years. And if you're wondering how someone who always sat at the far end of the table barely noticed came to hold all the power, let me start from the beginning. From when they still thought I was nothing. The yellow string lights swayed gently between the trees. Slow jazz kept time with the clinking of glasses and the breeze gliding over the lake. I stood near the edge of the lawn, holding a glass of water with both hands, trying to keep my breathing calm like before a big exam. My grandfather, Charles Carter, stepped into the garden, leaning lightly on his dark wooden cane. He spoke of time and family, and repeated the line he'd always taught me. Money doesn't define character. Actions do. I heard him say my name, and before I could brace myself, he announced he was transferring the majority shares and executive control of Carter Innovations to me effective tonight. The garden rippled with noise, then fell quiet like someone had turned the volume down. I met my mother Linda's eyes. She gave a thin smile, but her gaze didn't meet mine. Mark Blackwell, her new husband, turned red, his jaw twitching slightly. He raised a hand to speak like a reluctant host, and suggested a transition board for the first few months to ensure stability. I looked directly at him, and said clearly that it wasn't necessary the decision was effective immediately. The air thickened for half a second, then shifted again. Mark's phone screen lit up. I caught a glimpse of the words, term sheet, before he flipped it over and gave a polite smile to the guests nearby. An investor raised a glass to me and asked if I was ready at 22. I said I was ready to learn fast and take responsibility, and both of those start tonight. A new manager passed by smiling and asked if I was handling event communications. I said no, I was the one signing the checks for event communications. From the kitchen area, a glass shattered with a sharp, clean sound. People glanced over for a beat, then pretended nothing had happened. But I remembered that sound, like a turning point. From this moment on, I couldn't afford to be careless. My grandfather motioned to our family lawyer, Thomas Blake, to open his leather case and place a thick stack of papers on the side table. I signed each page, my hand slightly trembling, but my writing steady, hearing the pen glide across the paper as clearly as footsteps entering a new room. I didn't delve deep into the clauses, but among that stack of documents, there was one I had glimpsed. All major decisions would require 2 signatures, his and mine. Grace Chen, the chief technology officer, hugged me and whispered that my father would be proud. David Wilson, the CFO, tapped my shoulder and said this would be a long road ahead. His voice wasn't joking, but more like placing a hand on my back to help me stand straighter. Around me, congratulations and murmurs blended together. A few new employees still called me the girl not out of malice, just because they hadn't updated the facts yet. I didn't correct them. I wanted my work to do that. As I moved through the crowd, my mother leaned in and whispered that I signed fast and that she wished I had told her first. I quietly replied that I always did, she just wasn't there to hear it. My grandfather pulled me into a quiet corner of the garden. I confessed that I was afraid I wouldn't do well. He smiled gently and said he had spent his whole life preparing to pass things on, not to hold on to them. He placed a fountain pen in my hand and told me to sign the things I believed in. I put the pen in my pocket and looked toward the bar, where Mark had already reached his 3rd glass of wine. Grandfather softly told me not to waste my energy on people who only know how to latch onto others for a living. He had met them all his life. All I needed to do was remember who I am. I returned to the seating area, accepted a few congratulations, and responded to small talk about my plans ahead. I said I would begin by going through every department listening, before speaking, learning before making changes. A young manager frowned, then nodded as if seeing something more plausible than the rumours they'd heard. Mark approached, hand outstretched like he wanted to congratulate me. I looked down at the folder, then back at him and said, "Later," keeping my hand in my pocket. The mood shifted slightly like water rippling from a breeze, but I stayed still. As the music changed key, I went inside to find a bottle of water, my throat dry from tension. I thought of my father, of the times I used to walk with my grandfather down the company hallways at 16, and a wave of gratitude rose alongside a soft loneliness like mist. All through my life, the person who stood by me most wasn't my mother, it was him. I walked back toward the hallway, leading to his study, hoping to sit quietly for a few minutes. But my mother and Mark were already waiting at the door. My mother said we needed to talk, her voice light but not inviting. Mark slipped the key into his pocket, like the room belonged to him, and said it would only take a moment, his smile not reaching his eyes. He shut the door harder than necessary. I heard the click of the lock like a final period to the party. I leaned back slightly against the edge of the table, straightened up, didn't say anything, just looked at them, and repeated my grandfather's words to myself. Actions define a person. I waited to see what theirs would be. The door slammed shut, and I knew the party was over. The rest of the night was now a trial meant for me alone. The study was bathed in warm, golden light, the scent of old wood still lingering, and the sound of the lock still echoed in my ears. Mark stood in the middle of the room, as if to claim all the space, one hand in his pocket, the other tapping rhythmically on my grandfather's desk. My mother, Linda, sat near the edge of the table, her back straight, calm to the point of coldness. I leaned lightly against the opposite edge, hands clasped together to steady myself, saying as little as possible, "We need to talk." My mother began her voice like an announcement. Mark smiled politely, pulled a stack of papers from his bag, and slid them toward me. To ensure stability, I am proposing a 3 to 6 month transition board. Emily observes and adjusts. I'll handle operations temporarily. I looked at the papers but didn't touch them. Mark lifted the top sheet, pointing at a blank line. "Right here." He pushed the pen toward me, the tip clicking softly against the wood. I moved my hand back slightly. "I'm not signing." He tilted his head, that thin smile still on his face. 22, he said evenly. "You're still learning how to hold the pen properly. The board won't take you seriously. Don't let the emotions of a sentimental old man turn you into a symbol the company has to pay for." Mark's phone buzzed briefly. On the screen the words flashed, "Meeting tomorrow, draft signed." He quickly silenced it, smile snapping back into place as if nothing had happened. I kept my tone steady. Grandfather already transferred control. "The decision is in effect. I will listen and learn starting tonight, but I don't need someone running things for me." Mark tapped his fingers harder on the desk, each thump dry and irritating. "This is business, not a classroom. If you want to keep the seat, let someone experienced steer the ship." My mother cut in, her voice softer, trying to soothe. "I just want to make things easier for you, Emily." I looked her straight in the eye. "What tires me is being treated like I don't exist." Mark pushed the papers again, his voice lowering. "Sign tonight, and by tomorrow, everything's calm." I used 2 fingers to slide the folder back to where he first placed it. "Don't repeat yourself. I've heard enough." He curled his lip, then pulled out my grandfather's chair and sat down, swiveling slightly as if testing the fit. His elbows rested on the armrests, eyes scanning the bookshelf. "We'll need to reschedule meetings here starting tomorrow," I replied shortly. "Tomorrow, you won't be sitting in that chair." His smile vanished completely. My mother held my gaze a moment longer, then dropped the final sentence like closing a door. If you won't accept Mark's proposal, then tonight you'll pack your things. This is Mark's and my house. The words fell bluntly, no sugar, no wrapping. My heart skipped half a beat, then returned to normal. I said clearly, "All right, I'll leave. But I'm not handing the company over to anyone." My mother avoided my eyes staring at the edge of the table. Mark pressed his lips together as if he'd just won a small round. I reached out for the forgotten birthday card, slid it into my pocket, along with the pen my grandfather had given me, as a way to remind myself what really mattered. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, slow and steady. All three of us turned our heads. Mark lifted his hands off the papers. My grandfather, Charles Carter, stood at the doorway, still in his party clothes, eyes sharp, voice deep. "I've heard enough," he said, looking straight at Mark. "That was fast. I thought you'd hide your ambition a little longer." Then he turned to my mother. "This is how you protect your daughter, Linda." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. He turned to me, and for a moment it felt like the room held only the two of us. "Emily, go to the guest house and pack your things. Tomorrow morning, we activate Plan B." Mark's face turned pale. He stepped back half a pace. "What plan?" he asked, trying to sound calm. My grandfather didn't answer, just lifted his chin in a nod. I nodded back. There was nothing more to say here. I walked past Mark. He leaned in and whispered, "You'll regret this," I answered quietly without stopping. "No, I'll be busy." The hallway lights were dimmer now, the kitchen nearly empty. A staff member looked up, paused for a second, then gave a small nod. I nodded back. My spine seemed to straighten on its own. In the guest room, I pulled my suitcase from under the bed, packed a few outfits, shoes, a notebook and the fountain pen. I didn't bring much, just enough for a few days. The rest I could come back for later, or maybe never. I stood for a moment in front of the family photo on the shelf, then left it where it was. I locked the guest room door, hearing the bolt click into the wooden frame, clear and final. Tonight, I lost a roof over my head. Tomorrow morning, I would choose my own place to stand. I woke up early in the guest house, turned on the kettle, poured coffee, opened my notebook and wrote 3 short lines. "Call Grace, call David, notify Henry." Looking out the window toward the main house, I placed my phone face down. I didn't call my mother. Someone rang the bell. A small cardboard box was delivered from the main house. Inside were a few hastily folded clothes and an unsigned note, "Don't forget." I folded it and set it aside. I hadn't forgotten. I just wasn't going back. The phone buzzed once more. A message from an unknown number. "Have you taken over? Need confirmation for tomorrow morning's plan." I deleted the message. I don't respond to people who call themselves we. At exactly 8 o'clock, my grandfather knocked on the door, dressed in a crisp suit, a briefcase in hand. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Not much," I replied. He nodded. "Good. Today, you need to be alert, more than rested. We have 48 safe hours until 5 p.m. tomorrow. If things aren't in place by then, we switch tactics and go public." We sat at the small kitchen table. He opened his briefcase and laid out a series of photos and a concise summary. The photos showed Mark with some new board members having lunch with a major client, appearing in the hallways of Apex Dynamics with CEO Nathan Reynolds. There was a photo of Mark walking with a woman who wasn't my mother. Alongside the photos were detailed timestamps, who he called, where he met them, what was said. "How do you know all this?" I asked. He calmly answered, "I had him checked out the day after he proposed. Not out of suspicion, but because I've seen too many men like him." I turned the page and saw a few internal emails Mark had sent, claiming to oversee the transition and requesting copies of sensitive reports. My phone lit up with an email from Grace at 6:12 a.m. Request to access research files from a secondary account suspicious address. I blocked it. I replied, "Pin the log. Alert me if there's more." Grandfather tapped his pen lightly on the table edge. Plan B isn't a trick, it's a rhythm of work. 3 fronts you stand at the centre. He spoke slowly and clearly. The human front, call Grace to monitor all access to the research labs file, hourly reports if anything unusual arises. Call David to make sure all sensitive expenditures require approval, track cash flow. Daily, deny any irregular disbursement requests, send Chairman Henry a brief message transition stable, customer first, will update as needed. The operations front. Ask the tech team to temporarily suspend unnecessary access permissions, enable full activity logging flag, any permission changes requested by Mark or his people. Instruct building security to follow protocol, strictly no new access cards issued based on informal emails. The legal and messaging front. Attorney Alan Ross to compile evidence of Mark contacting competitors, store copies in a secure location. Release a short internal statement that the transition is in progress. Customers are the priority, and no comment will be made on rumours. No need to say much, he reminded me. Keep it short. Stay steady. At the top of my notebook page, I wrote, "We don't need to win everything today. Today, I need to stand firm." After saying it, I admitted I'm scared. My grandfather nodded. Fear helps you see clearly. Don't let it tie your hands. He placed his weathered hand on the edge of the file. I've prepared many things, but nothing can replace your decisions. You're the one who says yes or no. Don't let anyone say it for you. I got up and changed into a neat outfit for moving around. I fastened my watch, clipped my hair back, and slipped the fountain pen he gave me last night into my jacket pocket. I called Grace. I need you to monitor all R&D access. Report anything unusual immediately. All communication goes through company email. She simply said, "Understood," then hung up. I called David. Hold all sensitive payment orders. Send me daily cash flow reports. If anyone asks, say it's a directive from the CEO. He responded calmly. Got it. I messaged Henry as instructed. A moment later, David called back. There's an urgent transfer request to a consulting contractor, not on our list. I've held it. I replied, keep it on hold. No disbursement without review. A call from an unknown number came through. A man's voice introduced himself as a financial blog reporter. We've heard there's been leadership shake-up. Do you have any comment? I said no. Our priority today is our clients. I hung up and took a deep breath. After 3 calls and 1 refusal, my heartbeat was steadier. Not because everything was done, but because I had started. Grandfather grabbed the keys and said, let's go. Use the front door. If people look, let them look. You're here to work, not to hide. In the car, I practiced a 10-second sentence. Good morning. I'm Emily Carter. Today, I'm listening, deciding quickly, and taking responsibility. I repeated it twice, my pulse steadying. The city brightened. Traffic thickened. Carter Innovations came into view after a turn, the glass facade reflecting the clear sky. A system message came through, your access badge status under review. I tightened my grip on the bag strap. Fine. If not by badge, I'd enter with my name. My grandfather said nothing, just stared straight ahead. I opened the car door, stepped onto the curb, adjusted my lapel, checked my notebook and pen in my pocket. I didn't need anyone's approval right now. I needed to start my work. Today, I'll reintroduce myself, I said quietly, just enough to hear. Then, I walked toward the front door. I scanned my badge. It beeped red. The security guard looked up and asked for confirmation from the Executive Transition Office. I said I was Emily Carter and requested he contact CTO Grace Chen. He placed a guest sticker on my jacket. My phone buzzed. IT, a request has been made to restrict your access by the Transition Office? I replied, ignore the request. Wait for confirmation from the CTO. The intercom system echoed, all departments please send your daily reports to Acting Executive Mark Blackwell. A few people looked at me then at the guest sticker. Grace appeared, signed the visitor log, and brought me into the elevator. I pressed the executive floor button. It didn't light up. Grace swiped her card and the doors finally closed. "They've downgraded your badge," she whispered. I repeated the 10-second introduction in my mind. "Good morning. I'm Emily Carter. Today, I listen. I decide quickly and I take responsibility." The executive floor doors opened. The nameplate on my office door had been removed. Adhesive still visible. Mark's new assistant stood in front of the door, saying I needed an appointment. I pointed to the blank space on the wood. "First, I need to put my name back." Inside my grandfather's office, Mark sat in his chair. The whiteboard behind him was filled with a transition schedule. He stood up, smiled politely, and suggested I shadow various departments for a few weeks to learn the ropes, while he held temporary executive control for stability. I responded clearly, "I am the CEO, I don't shadow anyone." He said the board would meet soon because several members are concerned, then turned to instruct his assistant to change the locks on some offices and told IT to limit my access for safety. I said directly in front of them, both any change in access must be confirmed by email from the CTO and myself. If not, it doesn't count. I requested a small meeting room, as a temporary workspace asked for a clean computer and a list of all high-level access accounts and final approvers. By noon, phones across the company buzzed almost in unison. Temporarily, all approvals through Mark Blackwell. I opened my notebook. A team lead messaged asking if it was valid. I replied, "Stick to the plan. Any such approval requests go to me and Grace." I CC'd Grace so everyone could see the handling process. I didn't argue in the chat threads, buzzing with talk that the 22-year-old CEO has been sidelined. I spent my time gathering evidence. Grace sent an access log, 6:12 a.m. There was a request to view research files from a secondary account with a suspicious address. She had blocked it. I instructed her to package the log, timestamp it, sign it, and send a copy to secure storage. David Wilson called. There was an urgent payment request to a consulting contractor. Not on our approved list, he had held it. I said, "Keep it held." No payment without verification, and asked him to send daily cash flow reports before 5 p.m. He added, "The urgent same-day order was just resubmitted again." I called accounting directly. "Keep it held. If anyone pushes again, send them to me." I sent Chairman Henry a brief message. Transition stable clients are the priority. I'll update when needed. Mark's assistant sent a meeting invite for a CEO capability review at 7:30 a.m. tomorrow. I responded, "Add Chairman Henry to the schedule. I'll confirm at 9:00. Early in the afternoon, a major client called, his tone noticeably different. "If there are staffing changes, we'll halt project acceptance." I replied calmly, "There are no changes to your project team. Please review the handover document this afternoon. I am accountable for the timeline." He paused, then agreed to keep the schedule, requesting an update tomorrow. I wrote in my notebook, "Retain client." All afternoon, I moved between the small meeting room and the hallways, speaking little, signing off on essential printouts, the company-wide email access logs, photos of the removed nameplate, and the list of high-access accounts. I instructed security not to issue any new cards based on unofficial emails. I called 2 key project managers, reminded them to stay focused on product and client delivery. Everything else I would handle. Mark passed by a few times, smiling at guests, never stopping at my temporary office door. I didn't call him in either. I chose the next task instead. Late in the day, I left headquarters and returned to the guest house. I opened my notebook and drew 2 columns, done and tomorrow. Under done, entered with my name, blocked badge, downgrade secured, 6:12 a.m, log froze. Questionable payment, retained major client. Confirmed meeting time with Henry, requested daily cash flow reports, stored copies of evidence in 2 locations. Under tomorrow, meet with Grace and David at 8:00, confirm meeting room with legal check emergency. Meeting, invite list, prepare opening line for the board. My grandfather walked in, placed a folder on the table, and set down a small key. Tomorrow, he said we open the safe drawer. I nodded. He opened the folder, flipped to a page with clipped tags, and tapped a line of clean text with the end of his pen. From this point forward, no changes can be made without 2 signatures. I read that line one more time to make sure it was clear. In my head, then opened my laptop and called Alan Ross to draft an internal announcement exactly 1 page. It stated all major expenses, all executive-level hires or terminations, and any structural changes would require 2 signatures, mine and my grandfather's, effective for 1 year, confirmed through company email, and a signed PDF. The draft arrived. I simplified a few phrases for clarity, then invited Grace Chen and David Wilson to co-sign the process confirmation section. We sent it to the entire company and the board while also saving a PDF copy in secure storage. I set an alarm for 500 p.m. By then, all key points needed to be stabilized. If not, we'd shift tactics. An email popped up. Mark's legal representative objected to the dual signature clause, calling it an operational obstruction. I forwarded it to Alan immediately, noting respond in writing. Attach relevant company charter sections. Henry Taylor messaged me, send the 3 points, you'll say 60 seconds. I replied without delay, 1 2 signature policy, 2 evidence of unauthorized access and shady transactions, 3 90-day action plan. I called David and asked him to compile a lock list by end of day, all consulting contractor transfers initiated after yesterday to be frozen until signed by both of us, halt all out-of-scope advances, and submit the cash flow report by day's end. Finance called urgently requesting approval for a second consulting expense. I turned on speaker, hold it. If anyone pushes again, patch them through to me. Grace sent a new access log. In addition to the 6:12 a.m. breach, there were 2 more attempts this afternoon to access research folders from a marketing department terminal. I instructed her to flag it, change the team lead's password, and notify me if it happened again. I held a quick meeting with the core team in the small conference room. I explained directly why even 5% public shares posed a risk rumors delay client, contracts slow revenue, devalue our standing, and open the door for competitors to rescue us cheaply. The 2 signature clause gives us time and shields us from reckless decisions. A manager asked if we should delay this afternoon's handover. I answered, no, deliver on time. Rumors don't touch client schedules. Alan walked me through 10 tough questions, including the sharp one, you're here because you're a Carter, right? I replied, I've worked here since I was 16. Today, I take responsibility with my signature. I followed the 3 agreed rhythms. What's been done in the first 72 hours, retained clients, blocked shady transfers, enforced email, discipline, secured evidence. What's being done today, applying the 2 signature rule, locking down risk channels, preparing for the board, and what will be done in the next 90 days, retaining key clients, finalizing the promised product roadmap, appointing 2 experienced operations leaders, and launching a community support fund. My grandfather said just one thing: I confirmed the transition plan, as stated, and let me handle the rest. A journalist called with a loaded question. Are you just a puppet? I repeated our exact message. The transition is proceeding as planned. No changes to project teams or timelines, then ended the call. I checked all key points again. HR had paused all executive title changes. IT had enabled strict logging, and legal had unlocked the archive codes to store all logs, memos, photos, and minutes. I prepared the handout materials, a 2-page summary, on top-numbered evidence appendix behind. The printer, jammed once I switched machines, printed the summary cover first, then the appendix, not letting a minor glitch delay the schedule. I called Henry to confirm the 9:00 a.m. board meeting in the main conference room, with video recording and formal minutes. The attendee list included me, my grandfather Grace, David, and Alan, across from us, Mark and his assistant. I sent the summary ahead to the board, noting that the appendix would be distributed in-room to prevent leaks. The clock struck 5:00 p.m. I reviewed the checklist announcement, sent Mark's objection forwarded to legal, lock list activated logs, and questionable expenses, compiled 90-day response, finalized meeting, logistics, confirmed. My grandfather placed a small key on the table. Before the meeting, we'll open the safe and retrieve the original agreement. I nodded, saying nothing more. I slipped the fountain pen into my jacket pocket, scanned the list one final time, and underlined 3 key points. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was focus, face forward, breathe evenly, do the right thing. At 9:00 a.m. tomorrow, when the conference room doors open, I'll walk in with my own case file. Morning came and the conference room doors opened. I walked in carrying my file. The room was brightly lit. Everyone was already seated in their assigned places. At my side were my grandfather, Charles attorney Alan Ross Grace Chen, and David Wilson. Across the table sat Mark and his assistant. Henry Taylor presided over the meeting, giving a brief reminder on the order of speaking, then signalled for us to begin. Mark asked to speak first. He repeated the word stability multiple times and proposed that he temporarily oversee operations during what he called a transition period, citing my youth as a concern. He referenced a self-issued memo claiming executive authority based on family arrangements. Henry interrupted, stating plainly that an internal memo is not legal authorization. Mark then named several clients as supposed supporters and let slip the first name of the Apex executive before catching himself and trying to rephrase. I didn't interrupt. I simply marked a note in my notebook. When it was my turn, I opened the summary sheet and addressed 3 points directly. First, the 2-signature policy had already been communicated. All major expenses, executive-level hires, or firings and structural changes now require signatures from both myself and my grandfather for 1 year. All valid documents include a signed digital copy and must go through a clear verification channel. Second, the violations. This is evidence of unauthorized access to research folders once very early in the morning and twice again the following day. All attempts were blocked. Alongside this is a list of irregular payment requests to consultants and contractors currently frozen. Third, the issue of ethics and background. This is a summary of Mark's name. Change history, 2 short-lived marriages, ending in asset withdrawals and photos of him meeting with Apex representatives before marrying my mother. I distributed the numbered case files. Grace confirmed that no legitimate directive was issued allowing Mark to access research files, and all unusual access attempts had been logged. David explained that the payment requests were substantial and lacked any accompanying contracts. Mark insisted it was a technical misunderstanding and that the costs were valid consulting expenses. I responded with 1 sentence, "Please cite the authorization document and corresponding contracts." His assistant attempted to interject, but Henry firmly requested she sit down, reminding the room that only invited individuals may speak. My grandfather stood and presented Clause 23B from the transition agreement. All major transactions, executive hires, or dismissals and structural rearrangements require dual signatures from Emily Carter and Charles Carter. Mark held no shares and no signing authority. Alan distributed certified copies to everyone present. I repeated slowly and clearly, no major action proceeds without both signatures. The room fell silent. Henry moved into the questioning phase. One board member asked me to summarize my 90-day plan. I laid out the 3 pillars clearly. First, retain key clients by delivering projects on schedule. Second, safeguard the product by following the committed roadmap with monthly milestone reports. Third, maintain discipline through email protocol spending rules and the 2-signature policy, while also adding 2 seasoned operations hires to boost resilience. Another member asked about market risk. I explained that although the public shareholding is small, it carries psychological leverage, rumours, delay handovers, slow revenue, lower valuation, and invite competitors. The two-signature clause acts as a brake, ensuring no unilateral decisions happen without proper review. No one brought up the self-appointed memo again once they had the certified copy of the transition clause in hand. Henry gave his closing summary and offered the following motions. Formally recognise me as CEO under the transition agreement with my grandfather as advisor. Nullify all self-issued statements from Mark. Restore full access and credentials to me. Prohibit the use of executive titles without board approval, and enforce department compliance with the dual signature policy. He called for a vote. Hands went up. The motion passed unanimously. I kept my breathing steady, thanked the board, and promised timely updates. I assured them client schedules would be honoured and no current project teams would be altered. Mark stood up abruptly and launched into a few personal attacks. Henry signalled security to escort him out. I didn't respond. As the room cleared, Henry advised me to hold an all-staff address later that day to restore company-wide confidence. I nodded and messaged Grace to book the main hall for the afternoon with the theme transition update and 90-day plan. Walking down the hallway, several managers came up to shake my hand. David reminded me he'd send the end-of-day cash flow report. Grace leaned in and whispered, "Keep your pace." I glanced through the glass wall down to the lobby and told myself this afternoon the entire company will hear me reintroduce myself. I stood before hundreds of faces, took a breath and spoke clearly. I'm Emily Carter. I take responsibility for my decisions. I don't know everything, but I learn quickly, ask the right people, and focus on doing my part right. The thing everyone wanted to know, I addressed it first. Mark has no authority. All self-issued announcements have been invalidated. My access has been fully restored. Project teams remain unchanged. There are no cuts planned. Client delivery schedules are intact, and if there's a problem, I am the first person accountable. I gave a brief reminder of the two-signature rule as a safety brake to prevent unilateral major decisions. Then I displayed a simple image on the screen. The nameplate on the CEO's office door had been reinstalled. We act, we don't just talk. I said, placing a one-page commitment sheet on the podium, outlining the 3 pillars: retaining clients, protecting our product, and enforcing discipline. I signed it on the spot and announced it would be sent to the shared inbox right after the meeting. I then outlined a practical and relatable plan. This week, I will meet with each core department to hear issues directly. We will lock approval processes and access rights per the policy just issued. We're opening an anonymous reporting channel for unauthorised access, and conflict of interest reports will go directly to the CTO and legal. This month, we'll publish our committed product roadmap with regular review milestones and hire 2 experienced operations leads. This quarter, I will compile performance results, and if structural changes are needed, they will follow broad consultation. We'll also launch a small community fund supporting science and tech education aligned with the spirit my grandfather built. I opened the floor for Q&A. A long-time engineer stood and asked, "Why should we trust you?" I answered directly, because the processes that protect this company are now locked, because the expert team around me is strong, and because this week's outcomes will prove it. I commit no delayed handovers, 0 shady spending, and all unauthorised access will be blocked. If I fail to deliver, I will answer to the entire company. From the left side of the room, someone stood up with a bag. I said into the mic, "If you've got a hard question, ask now. I'm here to answer." He paused, then sat back down. An anonymous question was submitted. "Will there be mass layoffs?" I answered firmly. "No. There are no plans for cuts. Anyone saying otherwise, please direct it straight to my office." Another question asked about rumours of a company sale. I replied, "There is no such agreement. Any external contact must go through legal and comply with the two-signature rule. This is the only valid point of contact if anyone receives suspicious inquiries. Someone asked about my grandfather's role. I said he is an advisor, but day-to-day operational decisions are the responsibility of the CEO. My phone buzzed. A project manager sent a brief message. The major client confirmed their acceptance today. I looked up and addressed the entire room. That's how we answer rumours. I closed the Q&A with a short pledge of integrity. Anyone willing to report, when someone crosses the line for personal gain, please raise your hand. Many hands went up. I raised mine too. The session ended. I didn't leave through the back door. Instead, I said clearly, this meeting ends here. I'm going with you to the product floor. I stepped down from the stage and merged with the crowd, stopping to answer a few short questions in the hallway, taking additional feedback and reminding everyone to send details through the form for the team to handle. Grace leaned in and whispered that the suspicious access attempt had just been blocked. The log saved and there was no impact on the product. I nodded and told her to post a short update on the access status page so the team could stay calm. David passed by and confirmed that the major client was sticking to their delivery schedule as per the earlier message. I thanked him and asked for the end-of-day update. I paused at the elevator, watching everyone return to their desks with steadier rhythm. That's when Alan approached and quietly said that a representative from Apex had requested a meeting as soon as possible to discuss strategy. I nodded. Okay, but they'll have to wait until I finish with my own team. I tightened my grip on the one-page commitment sheet and moved forward, knowing the next round was already waiting beyond the door. When Alan informed me that Apex had requested a meeting to discuss strategic cooperation, I agreed, but I set the ground rules immediately: send a written agenda in advance, hold the meeting at our headquarters, include legal counsel document, everything in official minutes, no discussions involving technical IP, and no matter what's said, the two-signature principle applies. Once in the room, I placed a recorder in the centre of the table. This conversation is on record, I said. One of their team glanced at another, then reluctantly nodded. The delegation greeted us politely. At the end of the table was an unfamiliar face. I pointed directly, "Who are you with this group?" He responded vaguely, "Independent advisor." I nodded and noted his name. They opened with talk of mutual benefit, resource sharing, and outside advisory. While speaking at length, one of them accidentally mentioned the title of a research document. I stopped writing. "How do you know that title?" The table went quiet for a beat before they quickly changed the subject. I didn't rush. I shifted to 3 direct questions. Who is officially representing Apex in this meeting, and what are their authorities? They listed names and titles. Has any outside advisor previously worked for Carter? They dodged, then carelessly referred to someone who knows Carter very well. Has that person ever requested internal Carter information for Apex or anyone else? They asked to discuss that privately later. I noted every word, my tone steady. David placed 2 draft contracts on the table, just sent by accounting. Same wording, he said. I turned the drafts toward the guests. No one offered an explanation. When they suggested an investment in exchange for a say in stabilizing executive seats, hinting at changes, I made it clear, we don't negotiate seats. If you want to try something, propose a small project. Public terms, dual signatures, and no access to R&D. They exchanged glances. A long silence followed. My phone buzzed a short message from Grace: suspicious access blocked. Log saved. I kept my gaze steady, flipped to a new notes page. During a break, the independent advisor slipped me a business card with a handwritten number. Call me later. I slid it over to Alan without a word. Security texted from the side entrance someone was taking photos of our floor directory. I asked directly, "Is that your team member?" They shook their heads too quickly. I closed the meeting with one firm statement. We await a non-binding written proposal. Include a confirmation letter that you are not using any advisor with a conflict of interest involving Carter. I stood up, shook hands only with their lead delegate, and ignored the so-called advisor. Once the doors closed, we stayed seated. Alan compared the new log entry to the Mark file we'd built and immediately matched it to a contact from one of Mark's prior meetings. David added that our inbox had just received another consulting service pitch, identical in structure to the previous drafts Mark had funneled through the system. I instructed the team to gather all correspondence logs, photos, and both old and new recordings arranged by timeline with matches highlighted based on Apex's language slip-ups. Grace proposed setting a clean trap, prepare a harmless decoy document, store it in a reserve folder with an enticing title and a deliberate typo. If anyone repeats the typo, we'll know the leak's path. I approved and told her to log every access point and user. I drafted a follow-up email to Apex reiterating our conditions, requesting a full list of participants for the next meeting, and asking for all materials in advance for legal review. Alan contacted the authorities. He came back with a single calm sentence. They're ready to receive a case file if needed. I looked at the file folder growing thicker on the table, and my breathing was steady and firm. They came probing for weakness. I let them leave traces. Next time we meet, they'll know they're staring into a mirror. I entered the neatly arranged conference room recorder, placed in the centre of the table, meeting minutes ready. At my side were Alan, Grace, and David. My grandfather sat quietly behind us. He would not speak for me. The Apex delegation was led by Nathan Reynolds, accompanied by their legal counsel, and a special advisor whose name appeared faintly on the attendance list. I requested the names be read aloud. The name Mark Blackwell was included. I marked a short line in my notebook and repeated the ground rule: this meeting is on the record. Nathan opened with words about partnership and stability. I replied that Carter was here to hear non-binding proposals only. We would not discuss executive positions, would not touch R&D, and any agreement must go through the two-signature process. After formal pleasantries, I asked 3 direct questions. 1. Is Apex currently using an advisor who has had a personal or financial relationship with anyone inside Carter? 2. Has that advisor ever received or offered to obtain internal Carter information? 3. Has Apex received any file or summary related to Carter's research from anyone outside the company? They hesitated and asked for a private sidebar. I declined and reminded them, speak on the record. Alan tapped play on a short audio clip, Mark seated at a bar with Nathan, before marrying my mother, speaking evenly. Once I'm in the house, I'll trade the research roadmap for a seat and a cut. Faces across the table changed. Mark claimed it was doctored. I didn't argue, I simply nodded to David. David laid a comparison sheet on the table, a series of consulting offers sent to Carter, all matching the tone and phrasing of a draft contract, just submitted by a third party. The clauses mirrored those Mark had previously tried to push into the system. I stated plainly, if these are legitimate, please provide signed contracts and matching authorization. They had nothing. Grace followed with a slide showing access to a sandbox environment her team had set up. The person who downloaded files had used Mark's credentials and a contact email listed in our investigation records. The files retrieved were decoys intentionally flawed with false parameters. Anyone using them would make costly mistakes. The room fell silent. Nathan looked at Mark, then turned back to us, and announced the immediate termination of Mark's advisory role and the suspension of all strategic talks for internal review. Apex Legal requested copies of the audio, the comparison sheet, and the access logs. Alan handed over certified versions prepared in advance. Mark jumped to his feet, shouting that I was framing him. I didn't respond. I repeated the one line that mattered today: everything is on record. Alan stepped out briefly to submit a pre-prepared legal file. When he returned, 2 officials entered the room, politely announcing that Mark was being taken in for questioning regarding intellectual property theft and fraudulent conduct. Mark turned as if to say something to me. I held my gaze and said nothing. I didn't feel triumphant. I thought of my mother of the days ahead when she would have to face the truth, and told myself I'd speak with her after all of this was done. Nathan apologised for the incident, stating that Apex does not tolerate unethical conduct, then asked that, when they're ready with a clean and transparent proposal, we allow them to resubmit. I thanked him for choosing fair competition and said Carter would review any proposal submitted through the proper channels. But for now, our priority remained clear: our clients and our product. As the delegation exited, I instructed Grace to issue a security notice reiterating access rules and the anonymous reporting channel. I asked David to send a brief reassurance letter to major clients, clearly stating no changes to project teams and delivery schedules remain intact. My grandfather rested his hand on the back of my chair, silent. I nodded to let him know I was okay. Alan asked permission to maintain ongoing communication with the authorities until the case advanced to the next level. I gathered my documents, closed my pen case. My shoulders felt one notch lighter, but I didn't relax. The next steps were just as clear as they'd been that morning: protect our clients, our product and our discipline, and speak less so that results could speak more. Back in my office, I powered up my laptop, reviewed my schedule, and drafted 3 bullet points for the team update email to be sent that day. Outside, my phone began to buzz interview requests, headlines with flashy spins. I closed the laptop lid. While others raced to tell my story, my job was to keep writing it by doing it right. I sat with Alan and finalised 3 core statements for all external responses. We compete cleanly and all misconduct has been reported to the authorities. There are no changes to the project teams or the committed roadmap, and updates will come through official channels. Please avoid speculation. We agreed that only Alan or I would speak publicly. All other departments would forward inquiries to the CEO's office. My first priority remained the clients. David and I called our major accounts, confirmed schedules, and gave them direct lines to reach us in case of issues. One client sent a thank you note for sticking to delivery despite the noise. I read it aloud in our internal meeting so everyone knew their work mattered. On the internal front, Grace completed her access audit, closed side doors, and published a simple, clear security status page so everyone could see exactly how the system stood. Legal compiled the Mark incident into a standard ethics training module, outlining which actions crossed the line and how to report them. IT and HR co-signed a red flag policy. Any request outside protocol must be reported immediately. Whistleblowers are protected. I met with the core team and summarised 3 measurable outcomes. Since the shake-up, CEO access rights are now standardised contracts, with key clients remain intact and all shady spending requests have been blocked. Next week's goals were also clear: finalise the internal product roadmap for release and open hiring for 2 experienced operations roles with transparent job descriptions. Then I took time for something just as important: a quiet meeting with my mother. She apologised and admitted she now saw how she'd been misled. I listened not to scold, but to set 2 boundaries to preserve both our healing and the company's safety. All divorce matters must go through attorneys, and she must not interfere with the business. If healing is to happen, we'll consider family therapy. I agreed to try, but made no long-term promises. Before leaving, I told her honestly, I still hurt, but I'll take it one step at a time. I returned to the team with a short address. I announced that our major client had officially signed off on schedule, thanked the teams for their execution, and encouraged them to keep that momentum. A small but clear gesture followed the company's values board, featuring the words "Innovation and Integrity" was reinstalled in the lobby. No speeches, just a single reminder of why this company exists. Later that day, Apex sent an official letter confirming they had ended all advisory ties with Mark and requested to pause strategic discussions for internal review. I replied politely, "We agree to the pause and remain open to reading any transparent proposals when they are ready." I launched a direct feedback form to the CEO and announced fixed weekly office hours anyone can sign up. On the very first day, an anonymous report pointed out a small protocol breach. We addressed it immediately and recognized the person who flagged it. That afternoon, I wrote a brief company-wide email titled 3 Things Today and 3 Goals for Next Week, outlining our next checkpoints, so everyone knew where we were heading. After replying to messages, I took a moment to review the tasks I had delegated. My shoulders felt lighter, but my hands stayed firm. I called Grace to remind her to keep oversight lean but tight. I called David to confirm the schedule for the next client visit and asked if my presence was needed. As I was about to shut down, a reputable investment firm sent a request to meet about a specific collaboration. They were clear no interest in board seats, just a disciplined partnership on a product both sides could build well. I smiled, forwarded it to Alan for review, and penciled in a tentative time. I turned off the screen, closed my notebook. Tomorrow doesn't need to be louder, just better. I began the week with a short company-wide email. 3 things today and 3 things next week, restating our 3 core pillars, protecting clients, safeguarding the product, and enforcing discipline alongside simple checkpoints for everyone to track progress. Then, I met with representatives from the Northbridge Fund about a trial project for our security product in a specific sector. I laid out the terms clearly, a well-defined scope, written success criteria, no board seats, no interference in operations, and all agreements subject to dual signatures. They agreed in principle and proposed a short trial phase for mutual assessment. Back at HQ, we opened hiring for the 2 operations roles as promised. Grace and David conducted interviews together using real-world scenarios instead of vague questions. One candidate leaned too heavily on personal ties and name-dropped Mark as a connection. I thanked him and ended the interview at that stage. In the end, we chose Olivia Tran as internal delivery lead, strong in execution and unblocking workflows, and Marco Diaz as operations team lead, excellent with processes and persistent with detail. I announced their roles, responsibilities, and evaluation metrics clearly, so everyone knew who did what and how performance would be reviewed. In their first week, a mid-level manager stalled, asking to delay handover due to fear of making mistakes slowing down the team. I invited him into a side room, listened to his concerns, then proposed a short improvement plan. Olivia would shadow the transition, and clear milestones would be documented. If delays continued, I'd reassign the role. He nodded, visibly relieved. On the product front, Grace reported that the latest update had locked code, and QA confirmed all remaining bugs were within acceptable limits. I approved the client-facing announcement with just 2 points: what specific benefit they'd see and how to reach support. One key client replied that they'd be happy to do a short case study after stable rollout. I noted it for the right time, no rush. In security and ethics, we released a user-friendly security status page across the company. No jargon, just what everyone needs to know. Legal packaged the Mark case into a 10-minute mandatory training, 3 quiz questions, and 1 signed acknowledgement. IT and HR co-signed a red flag policy. Any off-protocol request must be reported. Whistleblowers are protected. That same week, an anonymous tip caught a vague but improper request. We acted swiftly and recognized the reporter internally. I agreed to just 1 written interview with a reputable outlet repeating our 3 agreed core statements. I declined all clickbait media. The noise outside quieted. Inside, things grew steadier. I made time for my mother. She told me she'd been working with a lawyer and had started individual therapy. I listened to my mother. I told her that I still felt the pain, but I was willing to attend 1 family counselling session together. In return, she must not call anyone in the company about helping out, and everything related to the divorce must go through lawyers. She agreed and asked that I give her notice if I was scheduling anything that might conflict. We left the cafe in silence, but lighter than our last confrontation. Back at the office, I prepared a concise report for the board, 3 measurable outcomes. Major client contracts remained intact, product milestone was achieved, and the red flag alert channel was actively functioning. The next 3 steps expand the Northbridge pilot. If it met criteria, fully onboard Olivia and Marco into operations and launch a small fund for community outreach tied to science and tech education. While reviewing documents, isolated rumours surfaced on an anonymous account about executive reshuffling. Grace traced the source to a former contractor. We terminated the contract immediately and issued a legal notice. I didn't comment publicly. Internally, I shared only the actions we'd taken and reminded teams of the handover schedule. By weekend, 2 messages arrived in my inbox, both significant. Northbridge reported that the trial project had hit its initial milestone and proposed an increased budget for Phase 2. Almost simultaneously, Apex sent another formal apology and expressed interest in transparently sponsoring our STEM fund, with no conditions. I read both letters and thought back to those early days when I entered the company, wearing a guest badge, and how things had since returned to alignment. I placed the 2 letters side by side. The future doesn't knock with noise. It arrives through actions clear enough to sign your name to. I replied to Northbridge confirming that we would move forward with Phase 2 under the agreed criteria, maintaining the same conditions: no board seats, no operational interference, and all agreements to go through 2 signatures. For Apex, I accepted their STEM fund sponsorship with 3 conditions. The purpose must be public, the amount and source disclosed, and their name would not appear on any products or speak on our behalf. If violated, the funds would be returned. The signing took place simply in the conference room, with only the agreement and scholarship plan on the table. I signed first, my grandfather, signed after, and said just one short sentence: "Now you lead." Now, you. I thanked those who had weathered the storm with me, naming Grace, David, Olivia, Marco, and the project teams who had kept the rhythm. To the whole company, I spoke briefly, but clearly thank you for upholding the 3 pillars through difficult times. From today, let's turn them into habits. Signal early and truthfully, keep promises and deadlines, sign right and follow through. Olivia shared how she'd unblock handover bottlenecks. Marco said he'd maintain process discipline so everyone could focus on their part. I reminded everyone to keep using the 3 things today email at the start of each week to stay aligned. Later in the day, I met my mother at a small cafe near home. She placed the old house key on the table and said she wanted to respect the right boundaries. I said we'd start again with short dinners, no company talk, and everything about the divorce goes through lawyers. She nodded and apologised again. I gave her a short hug, just enough for us both to understand that healing would start from small steps. On the way back, my grandfather walked beside me down the hallway. He handed me the fountain pen he once gave me and said, "From now on, you sign before anyone asks." I smiled and repeated the words he'd told me from the beginning. Listen, decide, fast take responsibility. As night fell, I stopped by a nearby public school to deliver the first set of STEM kits from the newly signed fund. The children gathered around the plastic table, excitedly opening each box. One asked how to stand in my place one day. I told them the same 3 things I remind myself of every day: signal early and truthfully, keep promises and deadlines, sign right and follow through. The teachers thanked me, the students packed the boxes neatly. Returning to the office, I paused at the nameplate outside my door, touched its edge, and looked through the glass to see my team working. I opened the door, sat down at my desk, and sent out the day's 3 things today email to the company. I didn't need a grand conclusion. I only knew that I was in the right place, doing the right work, and keeping the promises I'd made. And if anyone ever asked me what I had learned, I would answer, do it right, do it fully, and do it to the end. The rest let others see for themselves.